as he investigates a mysterious glowing being that seems to defy explanation. What this farmer ultimately discovers about its true origins shakes not just his small farming community, but the entire scientific world. Before we dive deeper into this tale, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow we've got something extra special coming your way. It was just past midnight when farmer Michael Henderson first saw the ethereal blue glow coming from his cornfield. The autumn harvest was still weeks away, and he had been finishing up some paperwork in his study when an unusual reflection in his window caught his attention. At first, he thought it was just moonlight playing tricks on his eyes. The full moon had been particularly bright these past few nights, casting long shadows across his 200-acre farm. But as he stood at his bedroom window, squinting into the darkness, the pulsing light seemed different. It moved with purpose between the tall stalks of corn, creating patterns that no natural phenomenon could explain. Michael had been farming this land for over 2 decades, and he'd seen his fair share of strange lights, everything from fireflies to distant aircraft and even the occasional weather balloon. But this was different. The blue glow had an almost liquid quality to it, flowing through his cornfield like luminescent water. It pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Unable to shake off his curiosity despite his better judgment, Michael grabbed his flashlight and his old hunting jacket. The night air had grown unusually cold for September in Nebraska, and his breath formed small clouds as he stepped onto his front porch. The familiar crunch of gravel under his boots did little to calm his racing heart as he made his way toward the cornfield. The closer he got to the mysterious light, the more his surroundings seemed to change. The crickets, which had been chirping incessantly all evening, fell into an eerie silence. His skin began to tingle with static electricity, and the hair on his arms stood on end beneath his jacket sleeves. But what truly unsettled him was how the corn stalks began to sway and bend, despite the complete absence of wind. Michael's flashlight beam seemed weak and insignificant compared to the pulsing blue radiance that now illuminated the corn rows from within. He could feel a low vibration through the soles of his boots, almost like a humming that seemed to resonate with the earth itself. His rational mind screamed at him to turn back, to call the police or at least wake up his neighbor, old Jim Tucker, but something stronger pulled him forward. As he pushed through the cornstalks, following the mesmerizing light, the air grew thick with an odd metallic smell similar to the aftermath of a lightning strike. The temperature dropped even further, and his breath now came out in visible puffs of vapor. His hands trembled as he pushed aside another row of corn, and suddenly he found himself in a small clearing he hadn't known existed in his field. What he saw there made him stand frozen in complete disbelief. There, nestled between the flattened cornstalks, was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen before, unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. Its body, roughly the size of a large dog, seemed to be the source of the pulsing blue light. Its translucent skin appeared to shift and flow like liquid crystal, and what looked like delicate geometric structures protruded from its back, catching and refracting the light in impossible ways. For several minutes, Michael couldn't move, couldn't even blink, as he tried to process what he was seeing. The creature's form seemed to defy the basic laws of nature. It was both solid and fluid, organic and crystalline. As he watched, paralyzed between fear and wonder, the being's surface rippled, and patterns of light danced across its skin like aurora borealis in miniature. What struck him most wasn't just its otherworldly appearance, but the sense of intelligence he felt emanating from it. The creature's movements, though alien, seemed deliberate and purposeful. Where its features should have been, there was a complexity of shifting patterns that somehow gave the impression of awareness. It was studying him just as much as he was studying it. Michael's flashlight slipped from his numb fingers and clattered to the ground. The sound seemed to break the spell of stillness that had fallen over the clearing. The creature's light pulsed more rapidly, and the geometric structures on its back began to rotate and realign themselves in complex patterns. The air grew heavy with electricity, and Michael's watch face began to glow with an unnatural brightness. He wanted to run, to shout, to do something, anything, but his body refused to respond. As the creature's light intensified, Michael noticed something even more incredible. The flattened corn stalks around it were slowly rising, straightening themselves as if time was running backward. The dead plants that had been crushed under his feet began to green and revitalize before his eyes. This was just the beginning of a discovery that would change everything he thought he knew about life itself. In that moment, standing in his cornfield under the cold light of the moon and the ethereal glow of this impossible being, Michael Henderson had no way of knowing that he had just become part of something far bigger than himself. The simple life he'd known as a Nebraska farmer was about to be transformed forever, and the ripples of this encounter would soon spread far beyond his small farming community to shake the very foundations of human understanding. Michael Henderson was far from your typical Nebraska farmer. At 45 years old, with graying temples and weathered hands that told stories of decades working the land, he had always been known in Prairie Grove County for his methodical, almost scientific approach to farming. Unlike many of his neighbors who relied solely on traditional farming wisdom passed down through generations, Michael had earned his degree in agricultural science from the University of Nebraska before returning to take over his family's farm. The Henderson farm had been in his family for 4 generations, starting with his great-grandfather, who had claimed the land during the Homestead Act. The original 160 acres had grown to 200 through careful acquisitions over the years, and Michael had transformed it into one of the most technologically advanced operations in the county. He had installed sophisticated irrigation systems, used GPS-guided tractors, and even experimented with drone technology for crop monitoring. But despite his modern approach, the past few years had been increasingly difficult. The changing climate had brought unpredictable weather patterns that played havoc with planting schedules. Last year's drought had nearly devastated his corn crop, and this year's unusually cold summer had slowed growth significantly. The bank had been sending increasingly frequent letters about his outstanding loans, and the pressure to maintain the farm's productivity was wearing him down. Adding to his struggles was his recent divorce. Sarah, his wife of 15 years, had moved to Lincoln 2 years ago, unable to cope with the isolation and financial stress of farm life. Their separation had hit him hard, but it was their teenage daughter Emma's departure that had truly shaken him. Though she visited during school breaks, the farmhouse felt emptier than ever, its halls echoing with memories of happier times. His only real companion these days was his Australian shepherd Max, who had started acting strangely about a week before the appearance of the mysterious creature. The usually calm dog had become agitated, especially at night, barking at seemingly nothing and refusing to go near certain parts of the cornfield. Michael had dismissed it as reaction to coyotes or maybe a mountain lion passing through the area, but now he wondered if Max had sensed something else entirely. The morning after his encounter with the glowing creature, Michael sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The rational, scientific part of his mind struggled to process the impossible events of the previous night. He had spent hours reading scientific journals and agricultural reports over the years, but nothing in his education or experience could explain what he had witnessed. His first instinct had been to call the authorities, but something held him back. In a small farming community like Prairie Grove, news traveled fast, and he couldn't bear the thought of becoming the local laughingstock if people didn't believe him. More importantly, there was a nagging fear about what might happen to the creature if the wrong people found out about it. The way it had revived the dead cornstalks suggested capabilities that certain organizations might be very interested in, and not necessarily for the right reasons. As he pondered his next move, Michael noticed something odd about his coffee cup. The cold coffee inside had begun to steam, apparently heating up on its own. He quickly set the cup down and backed away from the table, his heart racing. Looking around his kitchen, he noticed other strange occurrences. The digital clock on his microwave was running backward, and the plants on his windowsill, which had been wilting just yesterday, were now vibrant and green, their stems stretching toward the sunlight. These inexplicable events were accompanied by a familiar tingling sensation in the air, similar to what he had felt in the cornfield. Through his kitchen window, he could see that the section of his corn crop where he had encountered the creature was now noticeably taller and healthier than the surrounding areas. The plants had taken on an unusual bluish tint, and they seemed to sway even though the morning air was completely still. Michael's scientific mind raced with possibilities. Whatever the creature was, it seemed to have some kind of effect on organic matter and energy itself. As a farmer who had spent years studying soil composition, crop yields, and agricultural innovations, he couldn't help but see the potential implications. If the creature's abilities could be understood and harnessed, it might revolutionize not just farming, but our entire understanding of biological systems. But with these exciting possibilities came a heavy weight of responsibility. Michael thought about his father and grandfather, who had always taught him that being a steward of the land meant making difficult choices. They had passed down not just farming techniques, but a deep respect for the natural world and an understanding that some discoveries come with moral obligations. As he stood lost in thought, his phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. She was checking in, as she did every Sunday morning, asking about the farm and sharing updates about her school life. Michael's thumb hovered over the keypad as he debated whether to tell her about what he had seen. His daughter had inherited his scientific curiosity and love for the unexplained, but he decided to keep the discovery to himself for now. He needed to understand more before involving anyone else, even his own family. The sound of tires on gravel snapped Michael out of his thoughts. Through his kitchen window, he saw Jim Tucker's beaten-up Ford pickup pulling into his driveway. His elderly neighbor had an uncanny ability to show up whenever something was happening on the Henderson farm, as if guided by some sixth sense developed over decades of farming life. Michael quickly composed himself and stepped onto the porch to greet Jim. The older farmer, with his weathered face and perpetual John Deere cap, had been like a second father to Michael since his own dad passed away 5 years ago. But today, for the first time in their long friendship, Michael found himself reluctant to share what was on his mind. "Saw some strange lights in your cornfield last night," Jim said without preamble, leaning against his truck. "Thought maybe you were out there with some newfangled farming equipment." His tone was casual, but his sharp eyes studied Michael's face with careful attention. Michael's throat went dry. Jim's property bordered his to the north, offering a clear view of the section where he'd encountered the creature. "Must have been the moon playing tricks," he managed to say, trying to keep his voice steady. "It was pretty bright last night." Jim nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced. "Funny thing about that moon," he said, pulling out his pipe. "Never seen it make cornstalks dance before, or turn them blue." He packed his pipe methodically, giving Michael time to process his words. "Whatever's out there, Mike, it's affecting more than just your field. My sensors are showing some mighty strange readings in the soil composition, and the morning dew on my side of the fence line is acting peculiar. Seems to be flowing uphill." The weight of the situation pressed down on Michael's shoulders. Jim's farm was one of the few in the county that rivaled his own in terms of technological monitoring. If he was picking up anomalies, others would soon notice too. Michael found himself at a crossroads. He could continue trying to handle this situation alone, or he could trust his oldest friend with the truth. But before he could decide, a low humming sound filled the air, and both men's watches began to glow with that now familiar blue light. Jim's pipe tobacco suddenly sprouted tiny green shoots, and the metal of his truck took on an iridescent sheen. The older farmer's eyes widened as he watched these impossible events unfold. "I think you better tell me what's really going on, son," Jim said quietly, carefully setting down his now growing pipe. For the next hour, Michael detailed everything he had witnessed the previous night. Jim listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as pieces of information aligned with his own observations. When Michael finished, a heavy silence fell between them. "We need to make some decisions and fast," Jim finally said, his voice grave. "Word's gonna spread. Sally Chen from the county agricultural office called me this morning about unusual satellite readings in this area. We probably have 48 hours, maybe less, before people start showing up asking questions." Michael ran his hands through his hair, mind racing through scenarios. The creature, whatever it was, clearly possessed capabilities that could revolutionize agriculture, maybe even solve world hunger. Its ability to revitalize dead plants and alter organic matter could transform desert into farmland, save failing crops, maybe even reverse environmental damage. But he also thought about his grandfather's warnings about the dangers of playing God with nature. What if the creature's effects weren't all beneficial? The altered corn was growing at an impossible rate, but was it safe? Would it affect the entire ecosystem? And what about the creature itself? Was it intelligent? Did it have rights? The ethical implications were staggering. "We have three options as I see it," Jim said, interrupting Michael's thoughts. 1. We call the authorities right now, FBI, Pentagon, whoever handles this sort of thing. 2. We keep quiet and try to study it ourselves, figure out what we're dealing with. Or 3. We help it leave before anyone else finds out it was here. Each option carried its own risks and moral implications. Calling the authorities might be the responsible choice, but Michael had serious doubts about how they would handle the situation. The creature's abilities would be too tempting for military applications, and he feared it would disappear into some secret government facility, its potential for helping humanity buried under classified documents. Studying it themselves was appealing to the scientist in him, but also dangerous. They had no idea what they were dealing with or whether prolonged exposure to its effects might be harmful. Plus, if things went wrong, they would be legally and morally responsible for any consequences. The third option, helping it leave, felt like giving up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it might be the most ethical choice, respecting the creature's autonomy and preventing its exploitation. As if responding to his thoughts, the humming in the air intensified, and both men turned to see a faint blue glow emanating from the cornfield even in broad daylight. The decision would have to be made soon, and they would have to live with the consequences. "Whatever we decide," Jim said softly, "we need to decide together. This is bigger than just your farm now." He gestured toward where their properties met, where the strange blue tint was slowly spreading through both their corn crops. "And we need to decide fast." Michael looked at his watch, now permanently illuminated with that ethereal blue light, and made his choice. The decision would change not just his life, but potentially the course of human history. He took a deep breath and turned to Jim, ready to share his plan. Michael and Jim spent the remainder of that Sunday morning putting their plan into action. They decided to study the creature themselves, at least until they could better understand its nature and intentions. But they would need help, someone with the right scientific expertise who could also be trusted to keep quiet. "There's someone we should contact," Michael said, as they walked toward the affected area of his cornfield. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, from the university's Xenobiology department. She gave a lecture at last year's Agricultural Science Symposium about theoretical alien biology. Everyone thought she was pushing fringe science, but she might be the exact person we need right now. Jim raised an eyebrow. "You sure about bringing in an outsider? Once we open that door—" "Elena's different," Michael insisted, remembering the passionate way she had defended her controversial theories. "She's been studying potential forms of non-terrestrial life for years, and more importantly, she's been vocal about the need for ethical approaches to any potential contact. Plus, she's got access to equipment we'll need if we want to understand what we're dealing with." After some discussion, they agreed to reach out to Dr. Rodriguez. Michael made the call from his landline, avoiding cell phones out of concern that the creature's energy field might affect digital communications. To his relief, Elena answered on the third ring. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is Michael Henderson. We met at last year's agricultural symposium. Yes, the farmer with the questions about theoretical biological systems. Listen, something's happened at my farm that falls exactly within your area of expertise. How quickly can you get to Prairie Grove County?" Elena's initial skepticism quickly faded as Michael described the strange phenomena they were witnessing. Within an hour, she had agreed to drive out to the farm, bringing what portable equipment she could gather without raising suspicion at the university. While waiting for Elena to arrive, Michael and Jim began documenting everything they could observe about the creature and its effects. They set up a makeshift research station in Michael's barn, converting an old storage room into a laboratory space. Jim brought over his soil testing equipment, and Michael dug out the scientific instruments he'd used during his college research days. The creature seemed to be affecting an increasingly large area. The zone of influence had expanded to a rough circle, approximately 50 yards in diameter, centered on where Michael had first encountered it. Within this zone, the corn had grown to nearly twice its normal height, with stalks as thick as tree saplings and leaves that shimmered with an opalescent quality. The air hummed with energy, and ordinary objects behaved in extraordinary ways. Metal tools developed strange patinas, digital devices displayed impossible readings, and organic matter showed accelerated growth patterns. Most remarkably, they discovered that water within the affected zone had begun to flow in unusual patterns, sometimes moving upward against gravity or forming complex geometric shapes in midair. When they tested soil samples from the area, they found that the molecular structure of the dirt itself appeared to be changing, becoming more crystalline in nature. Around mid-afternoon, they heard a car approaching. Dr. Elena Rodriguez pulled up in a beat-up Subaru loaded with scientific equipment. She was younger than Jim had expected, probably in her mid-30s, with sharp features and intense dark eyes that took in everything at once. "Show me," was all she said as she grabbed her equipment bags from the car. As they led her to the affected area, Elena's professional composure cracked slightly. She stopped at the edge of the zone, her handheld instruments going haywire. "Incredible," she breathed, watching as a drop of water from her water bottle floated upward and transformed into a perfect dodecahedron. "This is exactly what my theories predicted. A life form operating on different physical principles than Earth biology. The way it's affecting fundamental forces, this isn't just advanced technology. This is something that inherently interacts with reality differently than we do." They spent the next few hours setting up monitoring equipment and taking readings. Elena's expertise helped them understand what they were seeing in scientific terms, even if the implications were mind-boggling. The creature wasn't just affecting its environment, it was actively rewriting the physical laws within its sphere of influence. "Look at these readings," Elena said, pointing to her laptop screen. "The creature is generating what appears to be a localized field that alters the fundamental constants of nature. Gravity, electromagnetic forces, even the strong and weak nuclear forces, they're all being modified in subtle but significant ways. That's why water moves differently, why plants grow faster, why electronics malfunction. It's like it's creating a bubble of different physics." As they worked, Michael noticed that the creature seemed to be responding to their presence. The patterns of light across its crystalline surface changed when they approached, and the intensity of its effects increased or decreased based on their activities. It appeared to be studying them just as much as they were studying it. "It's intelligent," Elena declared after several hours of observation. "These aren't random changes. They're deliberate experiments. It's learning about our physics just as we're learning about its capabilities. This is genuine two-way scientific investigation." The implications of Elena's statement were staggering. They weren't just dealing with an unusual phenomenon or even a simple alien life form. They were interacting with a sentient being capable of sophisticated scientific inquiry. As the sun began to set, they gathered in Michael's kitchen to review their findings and plan their next steps. The creature's effects were still spreading, but more slowly now, and in a more controlled manner. Elena's instruments had detected patterns in the changes that suggested purposeful modification rather than random alteration. "We need to establish communication," Elena said, spreading out her notes on the kitchen table. "These patterns in its energy emissions, they're too regular to be natural. I think it's trying to talk to us through mathematical sequences. If we can decode them—" She was interrupted by a sharp bark from Max, who had been unusually quiet all day. The dog was standing at the kitchen door, tail wagging, looking more excited than afraid. Through the window, they could see that the creature's glow had intensified, and new patterns were forming in the air above it, complex geometric shapes that hung like constellation maps. It's reaching out, Elena whispered, her eyes shining with academic excitement. It wants to communicate. All we have to do is learn its language. For the first time since discovering the creature, Michael felt genuine hope. With Elena's expertise, Jim's practical knowledge, and his own understanding of the land, they might actually have a chance at making history. Not through conquest or exploitation, but through peaceful scientific exchange with an entity that could revolutionize human understanding of the universe. Just as the team began to feel they were making progress, the first major complications arose. It started with a call from Sally Chen at the county agricultural office early the next morning. The satellite data showing anomalies in their area had caught the attention of state officials, and she was being pressured to conduct an immediate on-site inspection. "I can stall them for maybe 48 hours, Sally told Michael over the phone, her voice tense with concern. "But after that, I'll have to file an official report. Whatever's going on out there, Michael, you need to get it under control fast." Michael shared this news with Elena and Jim as they gathered in the barn for another day of research. The timeline added a new layer of pressure to their work. But that wasn't their only problem. The creature's influence was beginning to show some concerning side effects they hadn't noticed initially. Elena's latest readings revealed that the altered corn plants, while appearing healthy and robust, were producing kernels with a completely unknown molecular structure. "We can't be certain these would be safe for consumption," she explained, showing them the analysis on her laptop. "The atomic arrangement is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if the corn is being rebuilt from the ground up, using the creature's own biological principles." Jim noticed something else troubling. The soil samples they'd collected from the affected area were showing increasing levels of crystallization, spreading deeper into the ground with each passing hour. "If this continues," he said gravely, "it could fundamentally alter the farmland. We might be looking at permanent changes to the entire ecosystem." Their concerns multiplied when they discovered that some of their electronic equipment was not just malfunctioning, but actually transforming. Elena's most sophisticated scanning device had developed an unusual crystalline growth on its circuit board, and the digital display now showed impossible readings in what appeared to be an alien numbering system. Adding to their worries, the weather itself seemed to be responding to the creature's presence. A perfect circle of clear sky had formed above the affected area, while the surrounding regions experienced normal cloud cover. Local meteorologists were already posting about the mysterious weather anomaly on social media, drawing unwanted attention to their location. The pressure of keeping their discovery secret was also taking its toll. Michael had to deflect increasingly persistent questions from other neighbors, and Jim's grandson, who helped out on his farm, was growing suspicious of the restricted access to certain areas. Elena had received several calls from her department head, questioning her sudden absence and unauthorized use of university equipment. But perhaps most disturbing was the creature's apparent response to their growing anxiety. As their stress levels increased, its behavior began to change. The once orderly patterns of its energy emissions became more erratic, and the geometric shapes it created in the air grew more complex and difficult to interpret. "It's like it's picking up on our emotional state," Elena observed, watching as the creature's crystalline structures shifted and reorganized themselves. "The mathematical sequences are becoming more chaotic. We're losing the pattern we were starting to understand." Around noon, they experienced their first real crisis. One of the transformed corn stalks suddenly began to emit a high-pitched frequency that shattered every piece of glass within a 20-foot radius. The sound was so intense that it knocked out power to Michael's barn and caused several of their monitoring devices to explode in showers of sparks. "This is getting dangerous," Jim said, helping Elena salvage what she could of her equipment. "We don't understand enough about what we're dealing with. One wrong move, and we could have a disaster on our hands." Michael felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. The creature had chosen his land, and whatever happened would be, at least partly, his fault. He watched as the blue glow pulsed through his cornfield, remembering how beautiful and promising it had seemed just a day ago. Now that same light filled him with apprehension. Their problems compounded when Max, who had been their early warning system for the creature's activities, began showing strange symptoms. The dog's eyes had developed a faint blue glow, and he seemed to be responding to commands before they were given, as if he could anticipate their thoughts. The creature's influence isn't just affecting plants and minerals, Elena said, examining Max with concern. It's beginning to alter living tissue. We need to establish some kind of containment protocol before these changes spread beyond our control. As they discussed potential solutions, a new complication emerged. Elena's initial analysis of the creature's energy field revealed that it was expanding exponentially, not linearly as they had first thought. At this rate, it would reach the main road within days, making it impossible to keep secret. "We need to make a decision," Jim said, voicing what they were all thinking. "Either we find a way to communicate with it and convince it to contain its influence, or we need to contact the authorities before this gets completely out of hand." The situation reached a critical point when they discovered that the crystalline changes in the soil had reached the underground aquifer. Water samples from Michael's well showed the same molecular restructuring they'd observed in the corn. If this contamination spread to the county's water supply, "We're in over our heads," Jim admitted, staring at the latest water analysis. "This isn't just about our farms anymore. We're talking about potential environmental changes that could affect the entire region." Elena, however, wasn't ready to give up. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a new pattern emerging in the creature's light emissions. "These sequences, they're becoming more organized again, but in a different way. I think it's trying to adapt its communication method to something we can better understand." Michael stood at the edge of the affected zone, watching the impossible lights dance across his cornfield. He had wanted to help study and protect the creature, to learn from it and possibly benefit humanity. But now he had to face the possibility that his decision might have put everything at risk. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the crystalline corn stalks, when they heard the distant sound of helicopters. Someone else had noticed their mysterious weather anomaly, and time was running out. The sound of approaching helicopters sent them scrambling into action. Elena quickly began shutting down her equipment while Jim pulled his truck behind Michael's barn out of sight. But before they could decide on their next move, Michael's phone rang. It was Sarah, his ex-wife, and her tone was urgent. "Michael, Emma's on her way to the farm," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "She saw something about a weather anomaly near Prairie Grove on social media, and she just took off in her car. I tried to stop her, but you know how she gets when she's excited about something scientific. She thinks it might be connected to her environmental science project." Michael's blood ran cold. His daughter was driving straight into a situation that was growing more dangerous by the minute. The helicopters were getting closer. The creature's influence was becoming more unpredictable. And now Emma was racing toward the farm, probably breaking every speed limit along the way. "How long ago did she leave?" he asked, already heading for his truck. "About an hour ago. Michael, what's really going on out there? The local weather forums are going crazy with theories." He ended the call with a promise to keep Emma safe, then turned to Elena and Jim. "We need to contain this situation now. Those helicopters are probably military or government agencies. Emma's less than an hour away, and we still don't know if exposure to the creature's influence is safe for humans." Elena's face had gone pale as she studied the latest readings from her remaining equipment. The energy field is becoming increasingly unstable. The crystal structures in the affected zone are vibrating at frequencies that could shatter more than just glass. If this continues to escalate... She was interrupted by a tremendous crack that echoed across the farm. A massive crystalline formation had burst from the ground at the center of the affected zone, rising like a transparent mountain, catching the last rays of sunlight. The creature's glow pulsed with unprecedented intensity, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with visible waves of energy. "It's responding to the approaching aircraft," Elena shouted over the growing hum of energy. "The vibrations from the helicopters are interfering with its natural frequencies. It's trying to protect itself. The situation deteriorated rapidly. The crystalline formation continued to grow, sending out branches like a massive tree made of living crystal. The transformed corn plants began to resonate in harmony with the structure, creating a sound that made their teeth ache. Max started howling, his eyes now blazing with blue light. Jim's soil sensors were going haywire, showing that the crystallization process had accelerated dramatically. "The underground aquifer is completely transformed," he reported grimly. "And it's spreading faster than ever. We've got maybe minutes before it reaches the neighboring farms." Michael's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls from neighbors, the county office, and local news stations were pouring in. The story was spreading as fast as the creature's influence. Through the growing chaos, he could still hear the helicopters getting closer, and somewhere on the dark country roads, his daughter was racing toward them. Elena made a desperate attempt to approach the creature, believing she could somehow communicate with it through the mathematical sequences they'd been studying. But as she stepped into the affected zone, her equipment sparked and died, and she stumbled as the altered gravity affected her movement. "The physics within the field are becoming even more alien," she called back to them. "The fundamental forces are shifting dramatically. If this continues to expand—" She didn't need to finish the thought. They could all see the implications of an ever-growing zone where the laws of physics themselves were being rewritten. Just then, they heard a car engine racing up the gravel drive. Emma had arrived sooner than expected. Michael ran to intercept her before she could get too close to the affected zone, but she was already out of her car, staring in wonder at the crystalline formation that now dominated the landscape. "Dad, this is incredible," she exclaimed, her face lit by the pulsing blue light. "The whole county's talking about it. Is this why the weather patterns have been so strange? What's causing it? Why didn't you tell me?" Before Michael could respond, the helicopters finally appeared overhead. 3 black military-style aircraft that began circling the farm. Their spotlights swept across the crystalline structure, and the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The creature's defensive response intensified, sending out waves of energy that caused the helicopter's instruments to fail. One of the aircraft spun out of control, its systems completely dead. As it descended rapidly toward the cornfield, Michael grabbed Emma and ran for cover. The helicopter's pilot managed to make an emergency landing in an unaffected part of the field, but the impact sent shockwaves through the ground that resonated with the crystalline structures. The chain reaction that followed was like nothing they'd ever seen. The crystal formations began to pulse with blinding light, and waves of energy rippled outward, transforming everything they touched. The very air seemed to crystallize in patches, creating floating shards of altered space where light bent in impossible ways. "The creature's scared," Elena shouted over the chaos. "It thinks it's under attack. We need to find a way to calm it down before it transforms the entire area." But how do you calm an alien being that operates on completely different physical principles? The military personnel from the landed helicopter were approaching with drawn weapons. The other aircraft continued to circle overhead, and the creature's defensive reactions were growing stronger by the second. Emma, surprisingly calm in the midst of the chaos, stepped forward. "Dad, look at the patterns in the light. They're like the fractals we studied in my advanced math class. There's a logic to them, a pattern we can understand." Michael looked at his daughter, then at Elena and Jim. They had been trying to communicate with the creature through complex scientific instruments, but maybe they needed a simpler approach. Maybe they needed to see it through fresh eyes. The next few minutes would determine not just their fate, but potentially the fate of the entire region. The military was closing in, the creature's influence was expanding exponentially, and they were running out of options. Whatever they were going to do, they needed to do it fast. In the chaos of military helicopters, crystalline transformations, and growing panic, it was 16-year-old Emma Henderson who provided the breakthrough they desperately needed. While the adults were frantically trying to contain the situation, she had pulled out her laptop and opened a program she'd been developing for her advanced mathematics project. "Look at this," she called out, her voice steady despite the mayhem surrounding them. "The patterns the creature is creating? They're not random at all. They're following the Fibonacci sequence, but in 3 dimensions. It's not just trying to communicate, it's trying to show us something about the fundamental structure of space itself." Elena rushed to Emma's side, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her concern about the approaching military personnel. "Of course," she exclaimed, studying the laptop screen. "We were so focused on trying to understand its biology that we missed the bigger picture. It's not just a living being, it's a living embodiment of mathematical principles." The military team, led by Colonel Sarah Martinez, had reached their position. Unlike what they'd feared, she didn't immediately try to take control of the situation. Instead, she listened intently as Elena quickly explained what they'd learned about the creature. "We've been tracking similar phenomena across different parts of the world," Colonel Martinez revealed, surprising them all. "This isn't the first contact, but it's the most significant manifestation we've seen. We're not here to contain or destroy it. We're here to learn from it." The colonel introduced them to Dr. James Chen, a theoretical physicist who had been studying similar incidents. These beings, for lack of a better term, appear to be scouts or researchers from a civilization that exists in what we might call crystalline space, a dimension where mathematical principles take physical form. While they talked, Emma had continued working on her laptop, using her fractal analysis program to decode more of the creature's patterns. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Every sequence it creates is both a message and a demonstration of how its universe works. Dad, remember how you taught me that farming is about understanding the patterns in nature? This is the same thing, just on a much deeper level." The military helicopters had landed, their crews maintaining a respectful distance under Colonel Martinez's orders. The creature's defensive reactions had begun to subside, though the crystalline transformations continued to spread slowly through the affected zone. Dr. Chen approached the edge of the transformed area, his instruments recording data. "The crystallization process isn't random or destructive," he explained. "It's more like a translation program, converting our physical space into something the creature can better understand and interact with. The question is, can we find a way to communicate without requiring such dramatic environmental changes?" Emma had an idea. Using her program, she began generating mathematical sequences that mimicked the creature's patterns but in reverse, starting with our physical laws and translating them into crystalline space mathematics. The effect was immediate and stunning. The creature's light patterns shifted, matching the rhythm of Emma's sequences. The aggressive crystallization slowed, and new formations began to emerge. Smaller, more controlled structures that seemed to serve as interface points between normal and crystalline space. "It's responding to the mathematics," Elena said excitedly. "Emma's program is giving it a way to communicate without having to transform its entire environment." As they watched, the creature began creating complex holographic displays in the air above the cornfield. Three-dimensional mathematical equations floated like constellations, showing the relationships between their universe and its own. Through these equations, they began to understand its purpose. "It's not just a scout," Dr. Chen said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's a teacher. These beings have found a way to exist at the intersection of mathematics and biology, and they want to share their understanding with us." The military personnel, initially tense and ready for conflict, had lowered their weapons and were watching in amazement as the mathematical display continued to evolve. Colonel Martinez was already coordinating with her superiors, arguing against any attempt to contain or control the creature. "This is a first contact situation," they heard her say into her radio, "and it's being handled perfectly by the civilians on site." Michael watched his daughter working with Elena and Dr. Chen, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she helped translate between human and crystalline mathematics. The fear and uncertainty of the past few days were giving way to a sense of incredible possibility. His farm, which he had worried might be destroyed by this encounter, was instead becoming the site of humanity's first real dialogue with an intelligence from another dimension of reality. Jim came to stand beside him, shaking his head in amazement. "You know, Michael," he said quietly, "when my grandfather taught me farming, he always said the land had secrets to share if we were patient enough to learn its language. Never thought those secrets would include something like this." The creature's light pulsed in what they now recognized as approval. Through Emma's program, they were beginning to understand that it had chosen this location deliberately. It had been drawn to the combination of natural life and human cultivation that the farm represented, a perfect laboratory for bridging the gap between its crystalline existence and our organic one. As the night wore on, more scientists and researchers began arriving, carefully coordinated by Colonel Martinez to maintain order and prevent panic. Each new arrival brought fresh insights and perspectives, but it was still Emma's simple fractal program that provided the clearest channel of communication with their visitor. "Remember when you used to tell me that understanding patterns was the key to understanding life?" Emma asked her father as they took a break from the intense activity. "I think that's why it chose our farm. You taught me to see the mathematics in nature, and that's exactly what this being is trying to show us, just on a cosmic scale." The dawn of the third day brought a pivotal moment in their communication with the crystalline being. As the sun rose over the transformed cornfield, its light interacting with the crystalline structures created a spectacular display of refracting colors and mathematical patterns that seemed to dance in the air. But more importantly, they were finally beginning to understand the true purpose of their visitor's arrival. Emma, who had worked through the night with Elena and Dr. Chen, made the crucial breakthrough. Her fractal analysis program had revealed a recurring pattern in the creature's communications, one that went beyond simple mathematical principles. "It's showing us a warning," she announced to the assembled group of scientists, military personnel, and farmers who had gathered in Michael's barn, now converted into a makeshift research center. "But it's also offering a solution." Using her laptop, she projected a complex series of three-dimensional equations onto the wall. "These patterns aren't just about bridging our different physical laws," she explained, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "They're showing us changes happening in both our spaces, our dimension and their crystalline one." Dr. Chen stepped forward, his eyes wide as he studied the equations. "She's right. These mathematical sequences are describing a kind of dimensional degradation. Both our space and theirs are experiencing a form of entropy we've never encountered before." Colonel Martinez, who had been coordinating with various government agencies throughout the crisis, looked concerned. "Are you saying this is some kind of interdimensional threat?" Elena joined Emma at the projection, pointing to specific sequences in the mathematical display. "Not exactly a threat," she clarified. "More like a natural process that's affecting multiple dimensions simultaneously. Think of it like climate change, but on a cosmic scale." The barn fell silent as the implications sank in. Michael watched his daughter continue to work, pride mixing with amazement at how she had become central to this incredible situation. The crystalline being had chosen his farm, but it was Emma who had truly made communication possible. "The creature isn't just trying to study us," Emma continued, pulling up new data on her screen. "It's trying to show us how our dimensions are connected. The mathematical principles it's sharing aren't just theoretical, they're tools for healing both our spaces." Outside, the crystalline transformations had stabilized into what Dr. Chen called interface zones, areas where the physics of both dimensions overlapped in stable, controlled ways. The military had established a perimeter around the farm, but their role had shifted from containment to protection and support. Jim, who had been quietly observing from the back of the barn, suddenly spoke up. "The soil samples," he said, walking forward with a handful of reports. "We've been so focused on the strange readings that we missed something obvious. The crystallized soil isn't just different, it's better. The mineral content, the organic matter, even the microbial life, it's all been enhanced." Elena quickly confirmed Jim's observation with her own equipment. "The crystallization process isn't just changing the soil structure," she explained. "It's optimizing it, creating a perfect balance of elements and energy states. If we could understand and control this process, we could revolutionize agriculture globally," Michael finished, finally understanding why his farm had been chosen. "This isn't just about interdimensional communication. It's about finding solutions that benefit both our worlds." The creature seemed to respond to their growing understanding. The mathematical patterns in the air became more complex but also more ordered, forming what Emma described as a blueprint for healing the dimensional damage. Through her program, They began to understand that the being wasn't alone. It was part of a network of similar entities, all working to address the cosmic-scale problems affecting both their realities. Dr. Chen's team had set up advanced monitoring equipment around the farm, tracking the effects of the crystalline transformations on the surrounding environment. The process isn't just affecting the soil, he reported. The air quality has improved, background radiation levels have decreased, and we're seeing evidence of enhanced photosynthesis in all plant life within the interface zones. Colonel Martinez received a call from her superiors, and for the first time since arriving, she smiled. The Pentagon has agreed to classify this as a cooperative scientific mission, she announced. They're sending more researchers, but control of the project will remain with our current team. They're particularly interested in Emma's communication breakthrough. The news brought relief to everyone, but especially to Michael. His fear of losing his farm to government control had been replaced by the realization that it was becoming something far more important: a bridge between worlds. As the morning progressed, Emma worked with Elena and Dr. Chen to refine their understanding of the creature's messages. The mathematical patterns were revealing not just problems, but specific solutions. Ways to stabilize both dimensions by establishing permanent interface zones in carefully chosen locations around the world. These zones wouldn't just be bridges for communication, Emma explained, showing complex projections of potential sites. They would act like environmental healing centers, gradually repairing the damage in both our spaces while maintaining the distinct properties of each dimension. The creature's light pulsed in what they now recognized as confirmation, creating new patterns that expanded on Emma's explanation. Through these patterns, they learned that similar interface zones were being established in other locations, each chosen for its unique environmental and geometric properties. The breakthrough in communication led to a series of revelations that transformed their understanding, not just of the crystalline being, but of the universe itself. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Emma and the scientific team began uncovering layers of information embedded within the mathematical patterns that made their earlier discoveries seem simple by comparison. The creature, sensing their growing comprehension, initiated a new form of communication. The crystalline structures throughout the affected zone began arranging themselves into what Dr. Chen described as a four-dimensional display, a visual representation that existed partially in our space and partially in the crystalline dimension. "It's showing us its home," Emma gasped, as her program translated the complex patterns into comprehensible data. The display revealed glimpses of a reality where mathematics took physical form, where thought and structure were intertwined in ways that defied human understanding. In this crystalline dimension, consciousness itself was a geometric pattern, and communication happened through the manipulation of spatial mathematics. But look at this. Elena pointed to a disturbing sequence in the patterns. Their dimension is experiencing a form of decay we couldn't even conceive of. It's not just physical degradation. It's as if the mathematical constants that define their reality are becoming unstable. Dr. Chen's analysis confirmed Elena's observation. And it's not just affecting their space, he added grimly. The degradation is bleeding through to our dimension as well. We've been detecting unusual quantum fluctuations for years, but couldn't explain their source. Now we know. They're echoes of this dimensional decay. The military observers, who had been maintaining a respectful distance, drew closer as the implications became clear. Colonel Martinez spoke into her secure phone, updating her superiors on the situation. "This isn't just a scientific curiosity anymore," she said after ending the call. "If what we're seeing is accurate, both our dimensions are facing an existential threat." Michael, who had been quietly watching the proceedings, suddenly noticed something about the crystalline transformations in his cornfield. "The plants," he said, walking to the edge of an interface zone. "They're not just growing differently, they're evolving. Look at how they're incorporating crystalline structures into their cellular makeup." Elena quickly confirmed his observation with her equipment. "The interface zones aren't just bridges between dimensions," she explained excitedly. "They're laboratories for developing hybrid forms of life that can exist in both spaces. The creature isn't just warning us, it's helping us adapt." Emma's program had continued processing the mathematical patterns, revealing more about the creature's purpose. "It's part of something called the Harmonic Initiative," she translated, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "There are others like it, establishing similar interface zones around our world. They're creating a network of dimensional bridges that will help stabilize both our realities." As if responding to Emma's translation, the creature generated a new series of patterns that expanded their understanding even further. Through these communications, they learned that the being was part of a vast collective of dimensional researchers, working to understand and preserve the delicate balance between different layers of reality. "The mathematics they're sharing," Dr. Chen said, studying the new patterns. "It's not just theoretical. These are practical applications of principles that could revolutionize our understanding of physics, biology, and consciousness itself. The healing of dimensional decay is just the beginning." The creature then showed them something that left even the seasoned scientists speechless, a demonstration of how consciousness could be translated into crystalline form and back again. The display suggested that thought itself was a form of mathematical pattern, one that could be preserved and transferred across dimensional boundaries. "This is why it chose your farm, Michael," Elena said softly. "You're not just growing corn here anymore. You're cultivating the future of human evolution. These interface zones will become schools where we learn to exist in both organic and crystalline states." Colonel Martinez's team had been documenting everything, but their initial wariness had been replaced by wonder. "The Pentagon's analysts are calling this the most significant event in human history," she reported. "They're mobilizing resources to support the expansion of interface zones under scientific supervision." As the afternoon wore on, they began to understand the full scope of what the creature was offering. The mathematical principles it shared weren't just solutions to dimensional decay. They were keys to unlocking human potential in ways they had never imagined. The interface zones would serve as transformation centers where humans could learn to perceive and interact with crystalline space while maintaining their organic nature. Jim, who had been analyzing soil samples from various points in the interface zone, made another significant discovery. "The crystalline transformations aren't random," he announced. "They're following the natural energy lines in the Earth. These locations were chosen because they're natural convergence points between dimensions." The creature confirmed Jim's observation with a detailed mathematical display showing the Earth's energy grid and its corresponding points in crystalline space. These convergence points, once properly activated, would form a planetary network of dimensional bridges, allowing for controlled interaction between the two realities. The world would never be the same after the events that unfolded on Michael Henderson's farm. In the weeks that followed the initial contact, the crystalline being's presence transformed not just the local landscape, but humanity's understanding of reality itself. The interface zone on Michael's farm became the first of many dimensional harmony centers established around the globe. Under the joint supervision of an international scientific committee and the crystalline being's guidance, these centers began the delicate work of stabilizing both dimensions while fostering understanding between organic and crystalline life forms. Emma's communication breakthrough led to her being offered a full scholarship to MIT, where she would lead a new department dedicated to crystalline mathematics. Her program became the foundation for a new field of study, bridging the gap between human and interdimensional science. "Dad," she said one evening, standing in their transformed cornfield, "remember when you taught me that farming was about understanding patterns in nature? You were preparing me for this all along. The military's role evolved from security to support, with Colonel Martinez heading a new international task force dedicated to protecting and studying the interface zones. Under her leadership, the world's governments agreed to treat these sites as neutral territory, dedicated to the advancement of all humanity. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's theories about alien life were finally validated, though in ways she had never imagined. She worked closely with the crystalline beings, learning that life could exist in forms far more diverse than humanity had ever conceived. The papers she published revolutionized multiple scientific fields, from biology to quantum physics. Jim's farm, like Michael's, became part of the first interface zone. The elderly farmer often sat on his porch watching the crystalline structures shimmer in the sunset, remarking how farming had led him to become part of humanity's greatest adventure. The enhanced soil from the interface zones produced crops with unprecedented nutritional value and resilience, offering solutions to global food security challenges. Michael's own role evolved as well. His farm became more than just a research site. It was a symbol of hope, a place where two fundamentally different forms of existence found common ground. He continued to farm, but now he was cultivating something far more precious than corn. He was growing the seeds of humanity's future. The crystalline being, though never fully comprehensible to human understanding, became a permanent bridge between dimensions. Through its presence, humanity learned that the universe was far more interconnected and mysterious than they had imagined. The mathematical patterns it shared continued to reveal new insights, suggesting that this was just the beginning of humanity's journey into a broader cosmic community. As Michael stood in his field 1 year after the first contact, watching new visitors arrive to study the interface zone, he reflected on how a simple farmer had become part of something so extraordinary. The crystalline structures now seemed as natural as the corn that they grew alongside, a perfect harmony of organic and geometric life. "You know," he said to Emma, who had come home to visit, "when I was worried about losing the farm, I never imagined we'd end up saving 2 dimensions instead." Emma smiled, her laptop displaying new mathematical patterns from their crystalline friends. "That's the thing about farming, Dad. You taught me that it's never just about growing crops. It's about nurturing potential. And now we're farming the future itself." The blue light pulsed gently across the field, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries come in the most ordinary places. The crystalline being had chosen a simple farm in Nebraska to make first contact, proving that every place, no matter how humble, could become ground zero for revolutionary change. Before we end this amazing story, please remember to like and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales that blur the line between reality and the extraordinary. What would you do if you discovered something otherworldly on your property? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And so, Michael Henderson's farm became more than just a footnote in history. It became a beacon of hope, a testament to humanity's ability to adapt and grow when faced with the unknown. The crystalline structures still pulse with their ethereal light, a constant reminder that in the vast tapestry of existence, every thread, whether organic or crystalline, has its place in the greater pattern of life. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay updated with more amazing stories. See you in the next video.